Everybody, thank you for coming to the local government workshop. It's nice to have everyone back. I think the last time we were all able to get together was November 2019, so welcome back. I'm Haylee Ferington. I'll be your moderator today. I formerly was at the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council and put together a draft scope of work for a fleet electrification study, which Jenny Loewenstein will talk about today and kind of kicked off the inspiration for this panel. So today we also have Matt Hegarty and Lauren Nice from Fairport Municipal Commission. Matt Hegarty is the superintendent and Lauren is the electric systems project manager. Rick Hauser is the mayor of the Village of Perry and the principal architect at Insight Architecture. We have Jim Bittker is the co-founder of Value Stack Energy and a leading energy efficiency and clean energy solutions consultant. We have Joe Bovenzi from Genesee Transportation Council. He's a project manager. And as I mentioned, we have Jenny Loewenstein. She's now a planner at Barton and Loewenstein, formerly of the Planning Council, and she's going to talk about the fleet electrification study. So today we're going to have a panel discussion. We'll let all of our panelists present themselves and the work they're doing, and then we'll jump into open discussion, if anyone has any questions from the audience from there. All right, Rick and Lauren, go ahead. It's up to you.
I forgot my glasses in my car, and the print they gave us is a little small, so I can see that. So Fairport Electric been in business for about over 100 years. We started EVs, hybrids, late 90s. It was more of a community decision. Sustainability. It was long before there were grants and loans and things available. So we'll just kind of give you a quick history, and then I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards. So. I've been a superintendent for about 8 years. I've been there for a little over 32 years, kind of came from the ground up. Lauren Nice is my project manager. She's the brains behind the organization. So huge help. And as we move forward, and we know we're at the cusp of as we move forward into pure EVs and the larger vehicles. So, okay. So quick history, we're one of the largest village-owned municipalities in New York State. We serve about 18,000 customers, 110 megawatt load, $28 million annual budget. There's 43, kind of like Fairport in New York State. Like I said, we have some with under 1,000 customers. We have some, near us, that 15, 18,000. The average size of a municipal across the country is about 2,500 customers. There's over 2,000 public power companies across the United States. We are 0% funded by our tax base or anything else. We're 100% funded by our rates. So it's almost a separate business within the Village of Fairport. We're a nonprofit, tax exempt organization. We have take a lot of pride in our system. We are in the top 10 in reliability and lowest cost in the country. We do it with less than 45 employees. There's 27 in the operations, and the rest being part-time people answering the phone and customer service and accounting. 50 vehicles. We have everything from Chevy Bolts and Nissan Leafs to large trucks over 37,000 GVW. Keep going here. So the first vehicle we bought was back in 2003. It was a Toyota Prius. It was the first Toyota Prius in Monroe County. I can tell you when Hazelton Chevy got it, or Hazelton Toyota got it, they looked at us and said, "We can't fix this." So, we were kind of in the beginning. We purchased our first hybrid bucket truck 2009. I'm going to kind of have some terminology: Generation 1 hybrid, Generation 2 hybrids, as we've folded through these, these many years. Generation 1 hybrids are ones that, in theory, should have worked, maybe worked, but I'm glad they're gone. Generation 2 is kind of what we're doing now, and Generation 3 is what we're going to look forward to. We purchased the first bucket truck with some EV capabilities. It was supposed to propel it. It was supposed to fly the boom in the air. We had it towed more times than we probably used it. But we all realize that this is it's a work in progress, and there's a lot of things there's some compromises. So Generation 2 we get into now. The EVs on our large bucket trucks, they don't propel the truck. It's still a diesel engine, but what it does do when we get to our job sites, the truck turns off, and now we have batteries to fly the boom, put down the outriggers, run the air conditioning, the heating. So we've reduced our idle time tremendously. We do use our trucks a lot. It's reduced the engine hours, but our PTO hours are still up. But now PTO is being propelled by the EV battery instead of the diesel engine. So there's no idling. So there are a lot of benefits. So like I said, Generation 1 vehicle that may perform a task, but not as well as a non-hybrid. Generation 2 can perform the task as well, has some advantages, and a payback is less than the expected life of the vehicle. Generation 3 is the future. This is what we're just on the cusp on right now. We're starting to see, and we're really looking forward to the next 5 years. Okay. So like I said, we have some small vehicles. We have some Volts. We have a Bolt. We have a Leaf. Being an electric utility, knowing we have to operate 24/7 at times, storms and things like that, we have to have a blend of vehicles. Hybrids work well for us. Gives us that 24/7 capability. It also gives us the capability to respond to mutual aid. We do travel out of state to help other utilities during weather events. So there is some concessions we have to do as an electric utility, but we do blend it. When we've done this since we bought that Toyota Prius, we have read all 18,000 of our electric meters with a battery operated car. So it's just one of those things that we're proud of. Next, please. We did buy an SUV. I'm going to go back, even though this is a 2019 new technology to Generation 1. We get 10 miles on the battery before it stops. It's nice. It gives us the 4-wheel drive capabilities we need in the winter at times, but 10 miles just isn't. So it is a hybrid. We're kind of looking forward to this one going down the road here, and because the technology since 2019 is much better. We're looking forward to using that. Okay. Nissan Leaf has been a great car for us. It gives us that 150 miles capability. We bought this, and right after this, they came out with some extended battery packages, which we wish we had known about. Get you over that 200-mile threshold, because we travel to Syracuse, we travel to Buffalo as doing business. So it does make life a little difficult at times, finding charging stations. Okay. The Bolt has been another good car for us. This is the car we use to read all of our electric meters. It is used daily. We typically go between 60 to 80 miles a day. Gives us a couple days worth of use. Gives us some storm capability. So this car has been very good to us. Next. We purchased a F-250 plug-in hybrid truck. What it does is it puts an electric motor into the drive shaft, so it helps propel the truck. Truck's been okay. I'm going to kind of call this a Generation 1 truck still. It still gives us the full capabilities in F-250. We still tow trailers. We still haul heavy loads. We need heavy duty equipment at times. It gives us the 4-wheel drive capabilities. So we have seen improvement in the gas mileage. I'm looking forward to this next generation of this type of vehicle for sure. Okay. Looks just like a normal truck. We're back in the garage at night and we plug it in. The battery does take up the full depth of the bed. So we lose about 8 inches of depth. So that's one of the things we had to learn. So instead of lifting here, all of a sudden we had to lift here to put things in the truck. Okay, next. So we've also taken our larger vehicles. These are the 37,000-pound vehicles that we put batteries on that run the PTO. It gives us all of our hydraulic functions. And what they've gotten a much better grasp on is the heat pumps and things. So we get that cab comfort because we work at times at 0 degrees. Guys will be up in the air working and, you can't climb back in the cab after working for an hour outside. Let's wait for 10 minutes where the engine heats up. We also work with 95. You have rubber gloves and sleeves on. You could not be hotter. And so when they get back in the cab, you kind of need it to just safety reasons. So we have heat pumps running off the battery. If they set the temperature to 75 degrees, it maintains that off the batteries instead of the truck running. So these trucks have been very good to us. We've kind of partnered with LTEC, which is a bucket manufacturer, but that's worked well. Next. It's cut our fuel consumption more than half, engine hours by half. Reduce the diesel engine PTO. We increased service intervals, which was nice. Less than 3-year payback. I can't ask for something better than that in a truck I keep for 10 years. So next. They look normal. We're able to fly them normal. And this was one of those things that it took us a little while to grasp is you have to partner the right employee with these newer vehicles. If you have a person who does not buy into the technology, it becomes a burden. But if you get the right people to buy into it early, they'll help the rest of the group buy into it. That was one of the things we definitely made some mistakes on. Okay. Once again, just another hybrid truck. Okay. We have some digger derricks. These are the trucks that have a great big drill. We have to drill 8-10 feet in the ground, 24-inch diameter holes. The PTO, the hydraulic flow for these trucks is so great that the engine has to run. They just don't have EV technology there for that right now. We'd have to tow a trailer of batteries to try to do something like that. So we do have, this gives us some cab comfort. We're able to put the outriggers down, some smaller things, but this is still kind of a generation 1, but we look forward to someday having better technology. Okay. There's the truck. Okay. So what went well, we're able to read all 18,000 electric meters, took the correct pairing of the employees to buy in. With the trucks not idling, we can now talk, to a guy 60 feet in the air and talk instead of yelling and screaming like you had to do before over the engine idling there, things like that. So it was, safety aspect we didn't even plan on. Okay. Fleet costs went down. We saw a reduction in diesel and, some of those costs. Technology's improving, so more and more employees, especially the younger generation, are buying into this technology. The resale value of the few cars did much better than we expected. 10 years ago, we were kind of afraid when we were going to have to get rid of these. What was going to happen to a 10-year-old Prius or a 12-year-old Prius? But we did okay. So next. We paired some of the wrong employees. They found out pretty quick they could bypass systems, led to rumors, bad feedback. We did find that repair costs went up. These trucks are out of service more than our conventional fleet. Anytime you put a computer on something, it becomes a problem. It also made us almost get different mechanics at different times because where you may have had a great mechanic who could do the mechanical part of it, but all of a sudden now you almost had an IT specialist to deal with some of the systems. Vehicle charging still limited. We do have a high-speed DC charger in Fairport now, which helps, but it's still limited across the state, but getting better. Okay. Manufacturers are not truthful when they talk to you about these things. When they tell you can go 300 miles, you can go 300 miles when it's 60 degrees and sunny, but when it's 0 in the middle of winter, you're not going 300 miles. They have to be honest to the public. That's one of those things that leads to the rumors and and problems. Very long lead time. Right now, if I order a bucket truck, it's 4 years. If I order it in 2022, 2026, I'll see it. We've been waiting for Ford F-150 hybrids for 14 months. It makes it very difficult. There's still limited choices in all-wheel drive. Volkswagen has a pretty good one right now. In the smaller SUVs, I think within the next year that'll get better. I'm hoping. And almost no choices for kind of Department of Public Works equipment. Garbage packers, dump truck, plow trucks, loaders, that type of thing. It's coming, but there's almost no choices right now. Next. We'll purchase another EV bucket truck. We'll see it in 2026. Like I said, we're waiting on the 2 F-550 hybrid trucks. Our police fleet, we are slowly transitioning over to hybrid. They'll be fully hybrid, then we will transition them over to EV. There is 0 EV police cars available right now. They have a police package. That's, you know, that's a problem. The manufacturers have to kind of get caught up. But we've also had kind of a sidebar, we've purchased EV zero-turn mowers and blowers. We have a fleet of landscapers that go out and mow village property 100% on battery. You know, 0 gasoline, 0 diesel, and they work really, really well. Next. We've completed 29 public accessible level 2 chargers within the village of Fairport. These are, you know, free to use for the customers. We've actually partnered with New York Power Authority and EPRI to do a study. Because one of the big things as electric utility, what does the future look like as everyone comes home at 5 o'clock and they plug in a charger? What's this going to do to the electric system, the grid? You know, there's some high demands here. So we partnered with them to kind of see the customers that have these cars, what do they come home with typically? Do they come home depleted? Do they come home at 70%? So we can start to study what we need to do to the electric grid to meet this demand coming. This has been a great project, and we'll complete this fall, and we'll have 2 years worth of data to analyze. So we've installed 50 residential level 2 chargers in homes where we're gathering data from people using EVs every single day. We have 2 DC fast chargers. We partnered with the New York Power Authority. Those do get utilized quite often. Okay. Next picture of them. So the analytics is what really hasn't caught up with all of this. So, you know, this is one of the things we get off of our level 2 charging, and we'll let Lauren talk about it because she's the expert. But we've also just found out we can start to get analytics from our bucket trucks. It wasn't available up until you know, about a month ago. So you know, these are things that help us make good decisions. So, okay.
So this is our EV Connect, which is the company that runs the software for this is for the 29 level 2 charging cords in the village. So you can see the data from just last April up through May this year. See almost 6,000 gallons of gas saved, 231,000 electric miles have been provided, and you can see the greenhouse gas prevented, as well as the carbon offsets, and then I guess the number of trees that have been saved from electric charging, sorry. We can also see the number of charge sessions. So we've had over 6,000 in the past year. People are charging about, on average, 2 hours. And you can see the connected time there. We started this, we installed these in 2019. So we've had over, you know, this is just from the past year. So we've had, obviously there's more data than this, but as you can see, there's a lot of good metrics here, and the community really buys into the level 2 charging, and it's also free. So anybody who has an electric car in the village or the town, or anybody visiting, can come and charge. And then we capture all this data, and we share this with our board members, the community, on our website. It's been really great over the past 3 years.
That's what we've done in a nutshell. So thank you.
We're going to have Rick Hauser from the village of Perry go next and talk about his experience from another municipal perspective here.
I don't know if this microphone is functional. You can hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, it's a hard act to follow. That was an amazing presentation in Fairport. Little Perry, population about 4,000 people, no municipal electric. We pay full freight. But we've done the next best thing. We actually joined a community solar project. I don't know if that's something folks are familiar with. But essentially, we are members of a community solar project in the region, which means that 100% of our electricity will be coming from the sun. And while I went into that imagining there would be a premium for that, what I found out was that we're actually going to save a guaranteed 10% off of what we're currently paying. That's essentially how it works. It flows right through our utility, our electric utility company, and then there's just a 10% adjustment at the bottom of the bill for this. So I highly recommend looking into that. It's kind of step one. I'm pretty sure that what's going to happen, just like with vehicles and supply demand, is that there very quickly is going to be way more demand for membership in community solar projects, as long as the incentives stay in place than there are supply. So I keep an eye out for that. And obviously, it's been a good tool for us. So we are doing what we can as a village. We started out a few years ago pretty modestly by just working with what was then a NYSERDA-driven rebate program to install some charging stations for visitors in our public parking lots. That was about an $8,000 incentive on a project that ended up costing about $10,000, including, the major cost was running the electric to the spot. So there's, it's the labor piece and the contracting piece. It's not necessarily the units themselves. In our case, we charge back for the electricity. So this is all done through ChargePoint. And our goal is to not lose money on it. So we adjust our charging rate per hour that people are plugged in to sync with what we end up having to pay for that electricity. And we have found, of course, ours went in about March of 2020. So there wasn't a lot of cars going places shortly after that. But in 2021, we started to see demand really get going. And by summer and fall, there's been kind of high demand at that location. So we're considering the need for a second set of dual charging stations because we find that we don't just have visitors, but we also have residents who don't maybe have their own house and they can't just buy a $500 level 2 charging station and put it in their garage because they live in an apartment. So that's an interesting thing to tuck away to municipalities, is that you're also providing a service for your residents to encourage that. And you might have to think about that as getting dual use because you might have some overnight demand as well as some daytime visitor demand. In our case, Perry is poised between Silver Lake and Letchworth State Park. So seasonally, we actually have a lot of people that come to the region and they're, I think, often looking for a destination where they can plug and play. I don't know how many of you drive electric vehicles, but I've had one for 3 years personally, and I find that you start to build your itinerary around where charging stations are. It's just because why not? You have a lot of options as a human being in the world, and why not say, okay, well, let's find one in a downtown where we can plug in for an hour or two, and while we're getting some juice, we can go around and check out the brewery or go to the bookstore. So it's a great formula. We've thought about it as economic development for the village of Perry. There aren't many things you can do as a mayor and a village board for economic development in a small town. And so when we identify things that we can do to help nurture small businesses and provide resiliency to them, we aim for that. So that's kind of getting rolling. And then last year, we started with kind of a deeper set of initiatives working with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council, who helped us walk through a kind of first round of the Clean Energy Communities program that was reissued and updated by also NYSERDA. And so we met with Jenny, who was then with Genesee Finger Lakes, and with Rob Richardson by Zoom pretty much every month. And they helped us kind of keep up with that. They helped us with all the various benchmarking. There's kind of creating a unified solar law. There's some items which are really just kind of getting poised to be able to track your usage and measure improvements and streamline the ability for your citizens to install their own solar projects, And then you get into some of the other nuts and bolts things. So one of the things we accomplished last year, working with our electric utility, NYSEG, is we switched all of our streetlights to LED. So we're starting to reduce our demand. They had a buyout program since they actually, essentially, they own most of our streetlights. So they said, you pay us the residual value of these old clunkers, and we will come in and we will replace them all with LEDs because it's in our own interest, so that we don't have to climb up there and bucket trucks and replace lamps as often. These things last so much longer. So it ended up being a pretty tiny payback period, maybe 9 to 12 months, and we're paid back from that residual value, and suddenly we're saving $20,000, $30,000 a year. Again, big amount, small budget, good step, less fuel being used. And then really getting into our own electric vehicle story, we had been doing research since about 2020 also on converting our vehicle fleet to electric. And this involved reaching out to some small towns. There's a town called Bargersville in Indiana that bought some Tesla Model 3s that has gotten a lot of phone calls over the last few years. I don't know whether to cheer them on or feel sorry for them. It's a lot of publicity, but they did a very good job of rollout. They did good PR. They laid out the math. They laid out the argument, and they've been generally pleased. So we spent some time there. We spent some time with community, I think Westport, Connecticut. Our police chief went out and actually spoke with the other police forces in a few different communities, tried out their vehicles, tried out a few other options. Our police force was behind this. That's important. They were equal partners and owners in the idea of switching our fleet. And really what that does is, at the village, we're always looking at two things. And in the short term, we're looking to be smart with taxpayer money. And in the long term, we're really looking to shift the village into a more resilient stance. And by resiliency, yes, I mean decarbonization. I wouldn't have known in 2020 necessarily what we'd be looking at in terms of fossil fuel costs today. So resiliency can just be really very selfish. It doesn't really have to be necessarily, you don't have to wave the flag of climate change if that's not going to help sell it in your community. You can simply say, we could be paying $4.30 per gallon for our gas. You have Dodge Chargers as your police vehicles. They sit around idling a lot. They end up netting about 10 miles per gallon. You drive 20,000 miles with a patrol vehicle, and it averages 10 miles per gallon at the end of that year because of all the idle time. That's 2,000 gallons. You know the cost of gas. That's over $8,000 in gasoline. You take a vehicle like a Tesla Model Y, really almost any electric vehicle, it gets between 3 and 4 miles per kilowatt hour. So again, you can do the math on that, and you multiply that by about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. It sounds really high compared to Fairport, but that's what we've got, and you still end up spending about $800 a year. So that $7 grand a year that's saved in fuel costs, you can pay a little bit more upfront for your electric vehicle. You can afford to install your level 2 charging station at the police station. It's true, the upfront cost compared to, say, a Dodge Charger, I think we're talking, from $35,000 to when we bought it, the base price of the Tesla was $57,000. There's an upfit charge. We had to pretty much figure out from scratch how to get the cage put in, how to get the lights put on, how to get the whole thing fitted out. There is not an industry yet in place for that. It's one of the biggest challenges. Still, at the end of the day, 5-year total life cycle costs, your Tesla comes in $20,000 cheaper than your Dodge Charger. And that does not even factor in what are those two vehicles worth at the end of 5 years when you might sell them. Because we don't have that data, so I don't factor that in. My guess is that the Tesla will probably have a higher resale value than a 5-year-old internal combustion engine vehicle that's got a lot of wear and tear on it, the way things are used. But we'll see what the market looks like. We are looking at another electric. We were looking at a Tesla Model Y, but now the lead times are crazy. And I think, just like I was saying with the community solar, I think we're going to find this is the challenge of the next 5 years is going to be supply demand on this, because it's such common sense for municipalities that it's, as I was saying earlier, it's a bit of a no-brainer. And as a result, the electric vehicle companies are not poised to meet that demand yet. So we would be about 15 months out for our next electric. Tesla raised the price $10,000. There is a potential, as we got on the first vehicle, there's a potential $7,500 rebate on electric vehicles through the state program. Another round perhaps is forthcoming. We're always like poised, waiting. There's rumors, and we're hoping to get there, and we will see how we do. So I'll pause there and turn it back.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that. Next, we are going to turn it over to Jim here. Jim, the clicker is right there, and you can stand up or sit down, wherever you're more comfortable.
Why don't I stand up?
Okay.
Yeah, hi. So what I'm gonna try to do is, as soon as possible, it'd be great to open this up to questions. So I'm gonna try to cover 3 topics pretty quickly. And the first topic is REV, which stands for Reforming the Energy Vision. I think it's important to have a understanding of what that means. And then the second topic is really more economic 101 principles, just to put things into context. The third topic is the most important of all, and that's a winning formula for what every municipality can do right now. And as you go away, this is a workshop, and it's a practical, pragmatic approach to funding and project development and back to funding again, which is the most important thing. What every municipality, unless you have a municipal electric serving your community, you're at the mercy of some pretty complex funding sources and project management, project development opportunities. So I really want to zero in on that. But first, let me start with just a quote from economics. Rudy Dornbush was a great economist. And he said in economics, things take longer than you think they would. However, all at once, they tend to finally happen faster than you think it ever could happen. And I can tell you, I was last invited, in front of this workshop about 3.5 years ago. I think it wasn't May, but it was snowing, and it was snowing a lot. And I had a session at the end of the day. And at the time, National Grid had a pilot program with $1 million in funding that ultimately would pay for the full cost of pilot projects. And ultimately went forward, did a bunch of work with teams that did a bunch of projects for M&T Bank, Hamilton College, Union College. The municipalities, the few people who stayed to the end of the day through the blizzard, when I talked about EVs, this is 3.5 years ago, and you people know who you are, looked at me like I was talking about witchcraft. So, what I can tell you now, the supply chain issues aside, the transformation to all electric is happening, and it's happening. It's going to be driven by technology, and very soon it's going to be driven by price. So the important thing is chicken or egg, and this is where I want to talk about REV. Okay, so one model is the municipal electric model, where the utility really takes the lead in building out the infrastructure. Now that works incredibly well for Fairport and some other municipal utilities, but in New York State, they're joint utilities. National Grid, NYSEG, and RG&E are actually part of Avangrid. They are for-profit entities. And so Richard Kaufman, who is the energy czar for New York State, really, when the whole vision behind the Reforming the Energy Vision is the idea of changing utility reform so that utilities The for-profit utilities are pursuing their own best bottom line interests and are compensated that way. Well, increasingly, and they're now being compensated in a way to distribute better results. And so the modern utilities and someone from National Grid here, the modern utilities, the joint utilities, are more distributed service integration platforms. Companies like National Grid and NYSEG and RG&E, they're increasingly better compensated for selling less electricity, for building out microgrids and different results than the old model, which was simply raise prices on your utility bill, get more money, and build out wasteful infrastructure. So that said, it's really important to understand, what the funding opportunity is within the model of the joint utilities. And I'm speaking to anyone in the NYSEG territory, RG&E, National Grid, Con Ed, Central Hudson. So, okay, so Economics 101, I mentioned an economist, I had, in a previous life, I had the opportunity to work on a classic economics textbook with 2 Nobel Prize winners. The second author won the Nobel Prize in 2018 for the economics of climate change, basically putting a price tag on climate change in the tens of trillions of dollars and the devastation. And the problem, the simple economics 101 is, yeah, we're paying $4.50 for a gallon of gasoline, but the real cost, the externalities, the tragedy of the commons is that there's unbelievable devastation that's going to cost everybody tens of trillions of dollars. So as a result, we need enlightened utility reform, and that's what's underway right now. The problem is, and this is where we get to the most important topic that I want to talk about, is the winning formula. Because in the future, the utilities will be regulated in a smarter way. It'll make it easier. There may be a time in the future where with your smart, well, actually that exists now. With your smart meter at home, you can charge your car at a much lower cost in the middle of the night than during the day. And this is all coming. But the winning formula right now is while we transition, to a perfectly regulated world, which we'll never get to, as people who work for public, for municipalities, you need to make pragmatic decisions, and more or less it comes down to cost and return on investment. So the winning formula right now is that 3.5 years ago, there was a simple $1 million to one National Grid pilot program to pay for the make-ready, to pay for the infrastructure costs, which tend to be the overwhelming cost for putting in EV charging stations. And again, and on the chicken and egg problem, I'm focusing on, whether it's the chicken or the egg, the charging station part, because that's less costly for the state of New York State. So New York State went from $1 million and ultimately was a $2 million pilot program to over $500 million. National Grid has over $100 million for their make ready. RG&E has 38 million, NYSEG even more. And this money is administered through solutions providers and can pay up to 90% of the infrastructure cost. So that's one element, because there were 3 elements of funding. That's the one element that's live and worth seizing on now. There's no, there's really no cost or obligation to securing, to determining what kind of make-ready funding, the incentive that you can get from the joint utilities, National Grid or NYSEG or RG&E. There's 2 more sources of funding. One was the NYSERDA Charge Ready New York program that would pay, would pay $4,000 per port, which would go a long way. That program, as many of you know, that program had 17 million and ran out in the middle of September, suddenly. The website had a meter, there was $3 million left one day, a day and a half later, all the funds were exhausted. That funding is not coming back. However, for municipalities, There's a third source of funding that has been available in the past that's coming back. The 2022 Department of Energy Conservation Zero Efficiency Vehicle Program. Now, there's two aspects of that. One is for actual vehicles and incentives for purchasing hybrid and increasingly all electric vehicles. And then the other half of that is for infrastructure. Now, in the previous years, there's been about $2.7 million in that program. And it wasn't even all used because you have to go through the Grants Gateway portal. It's not easy. However, it was possible to fully fund the equipment and the infrastructure. Now, the 2022 program, and all indications are they're going to have a much bigger budget this year, but there's much heavier demand. And that program will open its doors as early as next Friday, but sometime, could be a little bit sooner, or a little bit later, but that's opening up. So the opportunity now is for every municipality within these joint utility zones is to actually secure a qualification from the utility that will pay for 90% of the infrastructure costs, and then determine what the gap funding is for the remaining project, and then submit, instead of submitting for the full project, and you can actually submit with a qualified project that has already won vetted money through the utility program, and asking for a small sum that would take care of the gap, and with a much higher chance of winning that full funding. And then at the end of the day, go to the taxpayers, go to your boards and say, here's a project that's near full funding or full funding at zero cost to move ahead. So that's the real opportunity. And just one more point about the DEC ZEB program. There's a cost share based on median household income, So for the more affluent communities, worst case scenario is a 20% cost share on, say, 15% of the project. For many municipalities, the actual cost share is going to be zero based on median household income, especially rural communities. And so it's an opportunity to have a wish list of EV charging station projects built out at no cost before moving forward, and to take advantage of that. The best bet is to work through the clean energy community coordinator and talk about that. So there are a lot more specific aspects to these types of projects, which I'm looking forward to talking about. Let me just mention subscription costs, and there are certain things like open charge point protocols. So it's important, in looking at these projects, the question is, well, what's the catch if you can get something fully funded? Well, you're obligated to have these charging stations operate for 5 years to fulfill the incentive, the terms of receiving that money. And you're obligated to report that information back to the state, which is easy enough with the software that manages these systems. But it's really important to be aware of which software solutions you're using to network you into the world, so people can see your equipment, what you're charging, if you're charging, when they're available, et cetera, and to do that. And so that's something to be very aware of. And there's something called open charge point protocol. And it's what you want to do. In some cases, it's like Apple iOS. You're tied to the same operating system that runs the equipment. That's a consideration. You might want to be able to have some flexibility, like at Clarkson University said, well, 5 years from now, we'll just use open source software. We'll want to swap out. So, I'm looking forward to, getting into the weeds on these various projects. But the bottom line again here, the chicken and egg problem, the state is looking at it. Yes, subsidizing every vehicle, is a way to go, and the subsidies are coming, but that's a very expensive solution. The range anxiety, the chicken or egg, it's a much less costly approach. There's already more than $500 million that's already been designated for make ready through the utilities. There's a great opportunity to jump on these funding opportunities, and the DEC ZEB program is limited in funding and first come, first serve. So there's real reason to move quickly. Again, at no cost, you know, for municipalities, but to qualify and quantify projects and see what you can do and the exact cost before moving forward, because, you know, it's a fast changing area. You know, as I think some of you know, the Ford F-150, the first one, all electric, just rolled off the assembly line, I think in the past week. And, you know, things take a long time to happen, and then they happen pretty quickly. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And if anyone needs his formula, I wrote it on the board over there for everybody to see. And now we're going to go to Joe next. Thank you, Joe.
Good morning, everyone. So again, my name is Joe Bovenzi. I'm a program manager with the Genesee Transportation Council. And I thought I'd start out my talk today. Wrong way. I just want to give you a couple of minutes, just what GTC is. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. I know a few people are in the audience I've worked with before, but many of you may not be. So GTC is different from GFL, or we're both regional planning entities. But GTC is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for the Greater Rochester area. And our planning region is sort of the orange kind of block in the western part of the state here, these 9 counties. There are 14 MPOs across the state. Back in the 1960s, federal law began to require that every metropolitan area with a population of greater than 50,000 people have an MPO. And the MPO is simply a council of local officials, and their responsibility is to allocate federal aid funding for road and bridge and ITS and other projects in their region. So like I say, we're the MPO for the 9-county region. We're generally responsible, working in concert with state DOT, the thruway, the counties, the cities, and other municipalities for making transportation planning and investment decision makings. And then we have 3 main products: our long-range plan, which is sort of the general policy outline for the work that we do; our annual work program, the UPWP, and then our transportation improvement program, or the TIP, and that's the actual list of all the specific projects that are funded through your gas tax revenues. And again, I've worked with some of you over the years. Through the Unified Planning Work Program, we provide funds every year to municipalities for, you know, corridor studies, you know, local area studies. So sort of a plug, if any of you are in a community where you're thinking you might be able to benefit from some sort of a corridor study, you know, talk with me afterward and we can talk about your ideas. So that's about GTC. I wanted to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk from a higher level about sort of where the federal government is coming in on alternate fuels, specifically the alternate fuel corridor program. So I mentioned earlier that the federal government provides, every few years, there's a new law passed that provides funding for different road and bridge projects. And in 2015, that program was called the FAST Act, or the Fixing America's Surface Transportation. And this created a program where the idea was to build out a nationwide network of alternate fuels. And so there were 5 eligible fuels. They're all listed here. I won't read them out. But the idea was to look at the interstate system and provide funding for states and other local governments to deploy publicly accessible charging stations so that you can drive from one part of the country to the next and always have access to these fuel sources. So I'm going to focus on the electric vehicle information for this talk, but there's other, we can talk later about some of the other sources, other fuels if you're interested. So we've gone through, we've gone through 5 rounds of funding. We're currently in round 6. These are some of the basic criteria that the states have to look at when they're deploying these stations. And what they do is they will designate a stretch of roadway, a stretch of the interstate, and say this is a EV ready or EV pending corridor. And for it to be EV ready, you can see the criteria here. You have to have stations no greater than 50 miles apart. They have to be only 1 mile from an exit or interchange on the expressway. And this is a change from previous rounds. They actually narrowed it. It used to be up to 5 miles. And basically, you can see some of the details here. You need to have at least 4 ports for each charging station and be able to provide a minimum of 150 kilowatts per port. And then EV pending is sort of just means maybe you have a few stations, but they don't quite meet this criteria. So this is just a very simple map I put together. So I highlighted the interstates in red. So right now in our region, these are the roadways that would be eligible, either that have been designated by the state or that are eligible for designation. And again, with my comment earlier that the state's focus is on really building out a national network. So what we've done, their focus has been on Interstate 90, the throughway, which again is probably sort of apparent. We have also designated 390 and 490 as EV pending. Interstate 590, that short little road, is no designations, but that's just because that's a local highway, or really for more local traffic. So I expect in the future it will be designated as one of these criteria, but we haven't just got there yet. And again, New York State DOT coordinates that process through their office in Albany. So last November, the FAST Act was replaced by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is more commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the bill. And so this provides a total of around $550 billion in funding for transportation infrastructure projects over the next 5 federal fiscal years. And I kind of broke out, there's about roughly $351 billion for highway projects and about $91 billion for transit. And with this law, there's a whole slew of new programs. I won't go into those details today, but what the Federal Highway Administration is trying to do is focus on some key issues, safety, rehabilitation of bridges, and then addressing resiliency and sustainability issues. So with the alternate fuel programs in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are 5 kind of main categories. The ones that are probably of greatest interest to local governments, and I think the comments my fellow panelists have gotten into this, would be the first 2, the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And then sort of similar to that, there's a $2.5 billion in grants for charging and fueling infrastructure. And so these programs, grant programs can be used either for corridor charging to deploy stations along those corridors, or they can be used for community charging. So you could put stations out in, again, any publicly accessible location, so a town hall, a recreation center, a library, but also even on private property, as long as those properties, those parking lots are publicly accessible. There's a few other programs I won't get into as much here, more focused on transit or school buses. But again, the NEVI program and the charging and fueling infrastructure grants are the kind of the main sources that you want to be aware of. So looking specifically at the NEVI program, again, this was intended for the states to help the states deploy EV charging infrastructure to create this nationwide network. So you can get from New York to California, wherever, and always have access to charging infrastructure. And the goal is 500,000 public chargers by the year 2030. So we'll see if we get there. Now, in order to qualify for these funds, what the states have to do is develop a infrastructure deployment plan, which again, New York State DOT has started work on that. I had reached out to them for an update before I came here today, so they have started work on that, and they are working on creating a website that will have some more detailed information about that plan. So what the states are supposed to do is get their plans to the feds by August 1st of this year. It's a very quick review and approval process, and then once FHWA approves the plan, then those funds will become available for the states to use. So New York State share over those 5 years is pretty substantial. It's about $175 million. I think it's like 22 million just for fiscal year 2022. And again, these stations must be located along those alternate fuel corridors. Now, if the corridor is built out, then the states can look at other locations to deploy these stations. But again, FHWA has to certify that a corridor has been built out. So I wanted to wrap up today just with a few slides, kind of listing some of the best resources that I use and that I would recommend if you're interested in this topic that you can check. So again, I won't go through all this in detail, but these are a series of state and federal resources that that's where I'm getting most of my information from. And then also from the utilities and not-for-profits. These are some organizations that I've also found helpful. And in full disclosure, I'm actually on GRCC, which is a nonprofit group. It's funded in part through the U.S. Department of Energy. I'm also a board member in that group, so I'm not trying to promote it here, but it is a good resource if you have questions about EV vehicles or EV charging, then this is a good group to reach out to, and they can help you with some of the more technical details. So that's all for me, and I will turn it over to Jenny Loewenstein.
Yes, thank you. And just so everyone knows too, I apologize for not saying this at the beginning of the session. All of the PowerPoints as well as the recording of today's session will be on the GFL website. So you'll have access to all those great resources that Joe mentioned as well on there.
Yeah, we're not going to require you to remember all of them, so. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jenny Loewenstein, and I recently started with Barton and LaJudas as a community planner. Previously, I worked with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council, where I worked on this fleet electrification study for the 9-county region, which I'm going to discuss briefly. So the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Fleet Study provides a strategy for advancing the conversion of fossil fuel vehicles to electric fleets. The purpose of the study is to examine the economic, operational, and environmental benefits of fleet electrification, identify the challenges and opportunities for fleet electrification, and also offer insights and recommendations on how fleet managers can begin the electrification process. This study was conducted from January 2021 to this past April, and financial assistance was provided by the Federal Highway Association Administration and the Federal Transit Administration through the Genesee Transportation Council. So whether driven by state or federal mandates to reduce emissions, the need to balance budgets by lowering operational and fuel costs, a desire to reduce your environmental impact, or simply trying to get ahead of this transition to fleets, fleet managers are increasingly looking at electric vehicles as a great options to meet their needs. And these government agencies really have this really great, unique opportunity to lead by example. New York State has made considerable progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Since 1990, GHG emissions have fallen by 13%, which is great. This is substantial, but significantly more needs to be done to reach that 85% reduction of GHG by 2050, as set by the Climate Act. And now I have this map up here because I have a question. Does New York State and our region have the needed infrastructure and policies to make this transition? The answer is kind of. New York State has more electric vehicle registrations and public charging stations per capita than most states do. And the 9-county Genesee Finger Lakes region has almost 6,500 registered EVs and over 200 public charging stations, as you can see by this map. And we're getting there. However, our policies need to keep up and support the transition of EVs and also look to other non-motorized forms of transportation as well. So I'll be discussing the recommendations in a little bit at the end of my presentation. So despite economy-wide job losses due to the pandemic, employment in New York State's alternative fuel sector actually climbed. We are seeing job growth by almost 5%. The alternative transportation supply chain industries have heavy concentrations in this region, specifically in Monroe County and also in Erie County. So these industries are poised to grow over the next several years, employing hundreds, if not thousands of people. In order to see this considerable growth in the alternative fuel and EV sectors, several considerations and questions need to be considered and answered moving forward. How do we work with our regional workforce development partners to recruit and train individuals for these jobs, people who are entering the workforce and people who are currently in the workforce who are transitioning their careers? And how do we ensure that they are good jobs, well-paying jobs, jobs with benefits, jobs that people want to keep? And also, how do we serve our low to moderate income and disadvantaged communities, as well as our communities that heavily rely on the tourism industry to meet the decarbonization goals set by the state? And how do we do it in an equitable way? As you all know, tourism is an important industry in our region. And while we did see some decline, obviously due to the pandemic, we are seeing that it is very important to continue to pull people to this region, especially from this 5-hour driving range. Especially as we expand our electric vehicle infrastructure to attract additional guests. I really liked that plug and play I stated it much more, like much longer in here. I like plug and play, that's nice. But that's what we want people to do. We want people to come to the region, know they can charge, they can plug, and then they can play in our communities. And how do we convince people to come here knowing that those are options available to them? The charging station infrastructure and visible EV fleets will increase the exposure within the community to the media, to guests, to prospective residents, and to prospective businesses. And as I notice the community's commitment to the goals of the Climate Act, there's a real opportunity here. And I think the report that we compiled at Genesee Finger Lakes really shows that there's a huge opportunity in this region to thrive in this sphere. So I worked with, I didn't realize I got all stretched out. I worked with several case study partners that spoke about their switching to electric vehicle fleets. Fairport Electric was one of our case study partners, which we really appreciated. But learning about the city of Rochester, the Rochester Genesee Regional Transit Authority, and also Fairport Electric, learning their insights was very valuable. Some of the important insights included the importance of having a long-term strategic plan to determine an effective strategy for fleet electrification and a future build-out. The strategic planning effort should include engaging with the community and publicizing the benefits of fleet electrification to encourage private citizens to look for electric vehicles for their personal use, and how to encourage outside residents to come into your community to use the charging stations that are available. This plan should also include a short, medium, and long-term goals on the future build-out, but that should include training, future infrastructure, and vehicle needs that should all be roped into this plan. It's also important for fleet managers to have a clear understanding of how their vehicles are currently being used, how far they travel, under what conditions, and before introducing electric fleets into their system. And you need to make sure you can find the best equipment to replace the equipment you have and make sure it's meeting the needs and the job that you have set for that vehicle. Most importantly, the case studies partners indicated that fleet managers must be patient and open-minded during this process. And the new equipment will work differently. There might be some benefits and there's going to be some challenges. So being open-minded and recognizing that technology is changing and what the equipment you might currently have might transition and be better later. And you may not see the outcomes immediately. So you need to consider things like maintenance and training needs during this process. So being open-minded is probably the best advice I can give and Matt can give, and a lot of our other case study partners also provided as well. So a couple recommendations listed in, during the report, I list several recommendations that are both federal, state, and local governments can do to make this process more smooth, to encourage full build out. But I'm just going to talk about several local recommendations. First is to simplify the charging equipment permitting process to support the installation of new charging stations. Permitting should be easy and understandable for people to come in, install a charging station publicly, and it should be less of a to-do to allow for more people to have access to charging stations. The next is to update local building codes and zoning codes to either require charging stations, encourage charging stations in new parking lots and apartment complexes, and define where charging stations need or can be installed within your community. Also to utilize clear signage about where EV charging stations are located within your community, and also create a publicly available map of where EV charging station is located within your community, and also include all those other places that you could play while you're plugging in. There are also a number of municipal leasing agreements available for electric vehicles instead of purchasing. So it's a recommendation that anyone should consider if purchasing electric vehicles may seem out of reach. There are several leasing opportunities as well. It is also a smart idea to work with a utility company early and often during this process for charging stations to make sure you're siting them appropriately and getting the utility rate support that you need. You need to make sure that your site is EV ready, that you have the electricity you need for the new demand. And again, work with your utility company early and often. Unless you have your own utility company, then it's just easy. So but still early and often. So I'm gonna go quickly through the 7 steps of going electric. The first is to define, why do you want to make this switch? How are your vehicles being used? Make a public commitment to fleet electrification. 2 is select technologies. Review and select the vehicles and charging station technologies that will fit your current needs and your potential future needs. What vehicles will successfully replace the internal combustion vehicles that you currently have? And this is a great time to consider available funding sources and also moving into that procurement options and determine if leasing or owning vehicles is most appropriate. Third is vehicle equipment and procurement. Consider all of your options. And if you go through a formal RFP or RFQ process, consider including technical support, networking, electric metering, and warranty as part of the solution. Number 4 is site review, design, and planning. And this is really where your utility company comes in. So review your potential sites for charging stations. You have to consider, points of entry and exit. And also, a step is a good time to consider other needs for your site, including signage, lighting, and any security or safety measures you want to include. Number 5 is permitting and approvals. Charging station installation must obviously comply with local, state, and federal codes. And it should be completed by a contractor who's a licensed electrical contractor. And any electrical contractor who's worth their snuff will make sure that all the relevant codes and standards are being followed during this process, and obviously are working with your local building authorities during installation. Number 6 is the construction installation process. This includes installing, charging the equipment, and the construction of electrical infrastructure that might be needed, things like the electrical panel, trenching, boring, things like that. And then once your equipment is installed and tested, it is important to monitor your vehicles the same way you would your current fleet. Are they performing the way you want them to? Why or why not? And what can be done to change the outcome, and just kind of thinking about how long these vehicles might be in play and whether or not you would change them out in the future. This is just the brief list of available resources that I used when compiling the report. The Transportation and Climate Initiative, NYSERDA, the DEC, the new Joint Office of Energy and Transportation, and also the Clean Cities. And that is it. Haley, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Very much. Jenny and all our presenters, we had a wonderful display of going from what a municipality does to how the region can do it with federal resources, with private investment help. So we have a great panel up here. Does anyone have any questions for them?